So today's workshop is all about how to make your songs more believable. I wanted to cover kind of my thoughts on the topic, and then we'll open things up to kind of have open discussion, just as a group on how we feel that we can help each other to write more authentically, might write more believably, and hopefully I'll spark some conversation with some of my opinions and thoughts as well. In order to talk about how songs can become more believable, let's start our discussion here, and I'll go through my thoughts on some of these, and then we can kind of open it up at the end and kind of have open discussion. But let's talk about some ways that songs can become less believable. So one of the things that I think hurts a lot of songs is when they're not about real situations and they're not about real emotions that the writer has necessarily felt. I think we can see through concepts when they're written through a hypothetical lens and you're just kind of making it up and sort of assuming how it feels. Not to say that you can't create fictional situations, but I think songs that connect with people need some level of real truth to them. Maybe the names and dates and places and all of the actual facts are changed, but the emotion needs to be real. So make your songs mean more by writing about real emotions and real situations that you can relate to and you can really speak to. You hear a lot of people saying, well, write about what you know, or write about write about what you've gone through, or things like that. And sometimes it's not about the actual situation. It's about the emotions that you felt. Again, it's fine to make up characters or change the details, but make sure the concept rings true. So a song can be true without being factual. The best way to write songs that connect with others is to write about things you have experienced yourself. This can be hard to be vulnerable, but really the good stuff, the good songs kind of hide in the things that you're afraid to share. So sometimes learning to be very open and honest can help you write more believable songs. So I said, write real shit. That's kind of the moral of the story on that. It's like when you come to song sharing meetings and you can tell someone just made something up and they're kind of almost like they're imitating other songs. I would rather listen to songs about real stuff. And in our songwriting challenges that we've done with At-Home Songwriting, when I tell you to write about things that have happened or things you've learned, those songs come out so much better than the songs where I can tell when people are making stuff up. Another thing that can make your songs seem less believable is if you use predictable or always using perfect rhymes. So a perfect rhyme is when the word has the same vowel sound and it ends the same after the vowel. So that's like rain, pain, heart, start, store, more. That is the most resolved, that is the most balanced and most stable type of rhyme. And that's almost like going to the tonic or going to your root chord sometimes in the middle of a song. The rhyme itself can be more powerful than what you are actually trying to say. So learning about different rhyme types is very important as a songwriter, and it's definitely an important tool to have. And trying to stay away from really predictable rhymes like heart, start, those types of things that can really change how you are believed. Chuck says Taylor Swift used perfect rhymes in the song we shared. Yeah, absolutely. Not saying that perfect rhymes are always bad, but a lot of times, Chuck, and you hear plenty of songs, people choose words because of that rhyme, and it stands out like, I couldn't think of anything else to say, so I'm just going to rhyme, right? So that makes it less believable. Also, using perfect rhyme in lines that are not about resolved situations can create a disconnect for your listener. So if you are writing a song that's about being unstable and like just very unbalanced, and you use all perfect rhyme, that can really take your listener out of what you're saying too, because the rhyme is too resolved. They say there's a saying that says, like, if things are fine, perfect rhyme. If they're not, use something else. Basically, is the saying. So think about how you're using uh, the different parts or the different types of rhyme. David says, so confusing when a lyric confuses the message in order to make it rhyme. Absolutely. In songwriting, rhyme is a tool, it is not a necessity. And a lot of songwriters think that you have to write from a rhyme perspective. Um, so I'm actually going to do a whole workshop on this in January, called Using Rhyme as a Tool, Not a Necessity, because we don't necessarily think all the time why we actually use rhyme and what rhyme actually does. And it's not as important in songwriting as you think it is. You know, a lot of times people think, well, just learning how to rhyme well is, you know, that makes you a good songwriter. And there's more than that. So the other types of rhymes that you should try to use: family rhymes, additive subtractive rhymes, there's assonance rhymes, there's consonant rhymes. There's a ton of different rhymes that you can use. And if you're curious on how to use these different types of rhymes, I do have another workshop on the YouTube channel at athomesongwriting.com. So check that out. It's always better to say what you mean rather than trying to force a rhyme, because a lot of times we sacrifice meaning for making that word rhyme. Also, rhyme is a spotlight. So anytime there is a rhyme, it not only brings resolution to a section, but it basically turns on a spotlight and says this word is important. So make sure, if you are rhyming and if you are using perfect rhyme, look at the words that are in that spotlight. Is that a word that you really think is important in the grand scheme of what you're trying to say? Because if the answer is no, then that can be where you lose a lot of listeners within that rhyming use. Also, another thing that can pull your listener out of your song and make it less believable is if you use couplets throughout the whole song. So there's two types of song sections. You have what's called common meter, where you have this is the Mary had a little lamb, fleece was white as snow, everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. So it's 4 stressed syllables, 3 stressed syllables, 4 stressed syllables, 3 stressed syllables. So the section doesn't resolve until you finish the section. That's called through written. So a lot of times you will have one thought that continues throughout that whole section. If you write in couplets, it means you have matching couplets where it's one line matches the line next to it. And a lot of times it's done in rhyming pairs, and the lines open it up and then it resolves it in the very next line. So you create this stop and go feeling, and they call it fragmented structure. So couplets can cause fragmented structure. So as you think about, do you want a free-flowing thought through your section, or do you want to divide it? That's how you think about using couplets or using other forms of meter. So having too much of that stop and go feeling within your songs and writing too much in couplets without giving us some contrast can pull the listener out, because we're starting and then we're stopping, we're starting and then we're stopping. So make sure that you're using couplets purposefully when you want to separate complete thoughts or sentences. And a thing to remember is when lines match each other rhythmically, they stop motion. They become balanced. And balanced pairs sort of leave a song feeling stuck. We don't get a lot of motion within the sections. So create motion within your lines by varying the lengths and also varying the rhyme scheme. The next thing that I think hurts songs and makes them less believable is misstressing your syllables or misstressing your syllables, right? We as songwriters, when we start to set our lyrics to melody, we sometimes misstress how we're putting our words together, and we're not using the natural shape of the language. So just like this heading here, misstressing your syllables is different than misstressing your syllables. So keeping the natural shape of language makes your lyrics and melody more believable because it doesn't cause the sense of your subconscious trying to figure out what you're saying. Because there's a lot of meaning that's carried in the melody of language, and that is based on the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. So when syllables are misstressed or you have unstressed syllables on strong beats, they lose meaning. So we understand the meaning in language based on the pattern, right? So if I read that, you'd be like, what the hell are you doing, Chad? We understand the meaning in language based on the pattern. So that's what I want you to think about is really, how are you placing your words, and do they sing and sound the way that they should? This is very important. It's something that a lot of people do not so well, but it is something that you should try to practice and look at in your own writing is, are you misstressing the patterns? And really it's caused by when we put unstressed syllables on strong beats. And it also happens when we try to rhyme a single syllable word with a multi-syllable word that the second syllable is unstressed. It's like when we try to rhyme the word ring with listening. We pronounce it a lot of times ring, listening, and we don't pronounce listening as listening when we speak, right? It's dum da da. It's strong, weak, weak. But if you are trying to rhyme it with ring, a lot of times you'll put that stress in, you'd go weak, weak, strong, right? So it's the opposite of how it should be. Also, a big killer for believability in songs that I hear is not figuring out your melodies. Melody is so important to songs. If your lyric is not set to a strong melody, that lyric is not going to save the song. Listeners can kind of tell when you just sort of recite your lyrics over chords without any sort of melodic thought. There's not a lot of melodic motif. There's not a set melody. Maybe you sing your song different every time you perform it. That's an issue. Not having repeatable and singable melodies makes a song sound unfinished. It feels more like it's written and it's not gelled together. So really try to figure out what your melody is, and make sure that you're focusing on how that melody can carry what you're saying lyrically. And don't fear melodic motif. I think some people are scared that their song is going to be too sing-songy, or it's going to lack something if there's too many, or if there's too much repetition. But honestly, unless you're just doing the same exact thing through the entire song, you don't have to worry about using too much repetition. Most of us aren't using enough repetition. So don't fear having something that repeats. And I think if you figure out a strong melodic structure, your songs will sort of naturally feel more complete and believable. And I think that's why, you listen to professional songwriters, and a lot of their songs, they sound like everything just works together. And I think it's because a lot of times the melody is thought out. It's there. Jeanette says she's all about a strong melody. Absolutely. Yeah. And our last workshop, what we did was all about melody as well. And be sure that your lyric rhythms fit with the melodic rhythms perfectly. This is kind of related to that stress syllable thing, making sure that the lyrics sound natural when they're sung over the melody that you have. Kind of related, but kind of different here. Another thing I think makes songs less believable is when you don't write lyrics that a singer would actually say. Um, if you write something that is not in everyday language, or maybe you're saying something that the singer themselves just wouldn't say. Like maybe it's a young phrase that you're trying to pitch to an older artist, like they just wouldn't say it, right? So thinking about who is singing and who they're singing to is really important. So as a songwriter, you think of it as you're really writing a script for a singer to sing. And many times it's either yourself, if you're the singer songwriter, so you have much more control and you have much more say on what you're willing to sing. But if you're writing for another artist, you kind of need to understand where they're coming from. Would they say certain things? Is it a natural thing for them to say? I know some of you in the meeting right now, like Chuck Thomas, has been writing for a lot of other artists. Chuck, would you agree with this? That when you're writing for another artist, it's like you have to really think about, would this person say it?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, when you're writing, whether it's a co-write situation or a solo write, and you're writing for somebody else's narrative, um, I can't write what they would never sing, what they'd never say. And that's one of the questions, in my project, that when I have my first sit down with an artist, one of the things I always ask is there anything you won't sing about? Is there any subject matter that's off the table? Cheating, drugs, profanity. I mean, there's a lot of things. Some artists don't care. The person I'm working with here in South Dakota said, "No, I'm an open book." I kind of knew that because I know this guy a little bit, but there are other artists who absolutely, the woman I worked with in North Dakota last year, I mean, she's happily married, has two kids, is in a great relationship. I just wasn't going to write a cheating song, though there was a little bit of friction in the relationship in the song, but I didn't write a cheating song because it's just not her narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Um, and if you write lyrics that your character would never say, or if they don't, it just doesn't fit the style of the singer. Um, that becomes it won't be believable, right? It's almost like if you hear certain artists do a certain cover song, it's like, yeah, the song is still good, but it doesn't fit with the persona of the singer. Um, and really think about who the singer is. You know, what is their style? Would they really say what you're writing? Um, David in the chat says he recalls reading that Chris Cornell said that he could never see himself or see writing like a straight ahead love song. Right. So it's, if you are a singer songwriter, you have total control over, this is what I say, what I want to say, here's how I want to say it. But you also need to think, if you're writing your own song in general, would people say something? Like you can go overboard on using a thesaurus, right? Like if you don't want to get too flowery, because big fancy vocabulary doesn't always equal better songs. Because here's a lesson that I think a lot of us learn the hard way, is the song is not really about the individual words. It's about how the sections communicate a situation or an emotion. So sometimes we lose the forest for the trees, right? Like we're trying to find just the right word that's going to make everybody fall in love with our song. And the reality is people don't experience songs as words, they experience it as messages. So not saying that individual words aren't important, but think about, is what you're saying, are you communicating it correctly? Chuck.
I think maybe an important point that could be another bullet point in this graphic is also, don't say something the listener really isn't going to want to hear. And by that I mean you can impart some very personal emotions and personal feelings, maybe something you're going through or something you've gone through that makes for a good song, but the people, maybe something involving suicide, something. I mean, there are a lot of topics that you can write about, that you can write a song that makes people uncomfortable. And I think that's another, even though it's part of your narrative, sometimes people don't really want to hear it. You don't want people, everybody in the room going to the bathroom because they're like, oh, I've heard this song before and it depresses me. So I would add that point there too.
Well, and there are ways to write around touchy subjects. Like Rascal Flatts has a song about suicide, and I can't recall what it's titled right now, but it says something about like leave the stage in the middle of a song. And the way that they wrote it is really done very tastefully, but it never mentions the word suicide. It never says the sort of graphic parts of it. But yeah, like you also have to think about, is a topic going to be universal? Like, you know, you can definitely write a song about when you went, and had some really bad Chinese food and like blew up the bathroom the next day, right? But people don't want to, people don't want to hear that, right? That's kind of your point, Chuck, right? Not TMI. So try to not do TMI. So I put on here, read the last line again, basically saying big fancy vocabulary words doesn't equal better songs. I see a lot of people getting caught up in just focusing on how do I say more colorful words, and a lot of the songs that we all like don't really have fancy words. They just have a really strong message. So that's something to think about. This is something that might take some explanation, but I see it a lot with newer writers, is instead of really letting a song tell us what it should be or how the message should go, we sort of imitate what we think a song is, where we kind of imitate things that we've heard before. So we will use cliche lines, we'll sometimes use cliche thoughts, and we kind of misinterpret what really makes a song. So again, this is where overthinking about rhyme comes in, where it's like, yes, rhyme is a tool, it's important, but it's not the end all. So sometimes we try to force songs to be things that the song really isn't feeling like it should be. We're almost imitating what we think a song is. We worry about writing a song more than we worry about communicating an emotion. And I think that's a weird sort of subtle mindset change, but really what we're doing is we're looking to communicate as writers. And song is just the vehicle that gets that emotion across. And I know that's a little bit of a meta sort of thought, but I think I have, in my opinion, I think I have started writing better songs when I sort of get out of the way of what I think the song should be and just kind of see like how should it like how am I communicating the overall emotion, and how am I like actually saying something rather than how am I actually trying to write a song, if that makes sense. So step out of the way of it, see what it needs. And this takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of trial and error. Understand that all parts of a song are really just tools that you use to communicate. So try to make structural decisions based on the content of the lyrics and the emotion that you're trying to communicate. So what I mean by that is similar to what we talked about before, where we said, sometimes the production can support the emotion of the song. The chords should give a certain feeling that helps to amplify the emotion that you're trying to get across. So make decisions based on what am I trying to say, or what emotion am I trying to communicate. Next thing I think that hurts a lot of us is not performing your song with confidence. I hear some people perform, and this is more of a performing thing more than a songwriting thing, I think, but I think it's important as you, especially if you're a performing songwriter, is to be confident when you're singing. Because if you feel like you don't really believe or know your song, your audience isn't going to feel like they believe or know the song. So if you're still figuring out a song, the listeners can sort of sense that. So just be aware that we can sort of see through what you're doing, and try to be confident and perform it with feeling, and try to be as confident in what the song is as possible. And if you can't be confident in it, maybe it just needs a little bit more work to kind of nail down the melody, maybe change some lyrics, those types of things. Because you need to believe in the song so the listener believes you. Um, I already said that. The work that you might need to do, it could be content or it could be structure. It might be what you're saying and how you're saying it. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of the my thought on that one. Another thing that hurts, like with your songwriting, is using too many cliches. So when we talk about cliche, we're talking about lines that are used so much that they really don't mean anything anymore. Like, how many songs say I've been feeling blue? Okay, we logically understand what that means, right? I've been feeling blue. First off, people don't really talk like that anymore, so that sounds weird right away. But we know what it means, but it has zero emotion left in it because that metaphor of feeling blue has been overused so much. Um, Other things like ultra common metaphors like the elephant in the room, red as a rose, those things mean nothing at this point. And it's almost like you're just imitating other songs. So try to get away from cliche and focusing too much on emotional lyrics instead of setting a scene with images and showing us what's going on, can be a way that you start to dig yourself into cliche land. So the more images that you use and you show us what's happening, your chances of being less cliche go up. But you need to have clear and original ways to add images. So, like red as a rose, that is not original. That is not, if you said red as my aunt's, southwestern chili, there's original, right? So come up with sense-based words, and doing like daily object writing is something that can help you get away from using as many cliches. So that's all I had from like a believability standpoint. What are some other ways that you think that songs, become unbelievable? And now we'll just kind of open it up to everybody to talk and kind of go through. So all of those things that I listed, do those resonate with you? Is that helpful on thinking about, believability and sort of authenticity? But what other thoughts do you all have? Jay.
You know, I was kind of curious, just thinking back on a song that was pretty popular a few decades ago. And it's only because the topic came up in this. And I'm sure that because it was used as a theme song for a very popular show, and the writer was fairly, I guess, relatively popular at the time, how it kind of resonated for as long as it did. And his Suicide is Painless from Howie Mandel. And I mean, it just really landed with MASH. And I'm sure with the Vietnam War, there's a lot of sentiment with it. But I'd be kind of curious to know what your thoughts are on how it kind of stayed in the foreground as long as it did, and Chuck's as well.
I'm not familiar with that song, so I don't know. Um,
Fair
Chuck,
enough.
do you know that song, Chuck?
I was writing a reply to Jay's message to me, so I didn't even hear his question. I
Oh no, that's
apologize.
all right. I was actually kind of commenting on the song "Suicide is Painless," the theme song to MASH, and how it kind of stayed relevant for as long as it did. And I was just kind of curious as to what your thoughts may be about how it stayed in light for as long as it did, or didn't get changed to another theme song, for example, just because having soured with the topic being what it was.
Well, my impression is the popularity of the show probably kept that song in power and in the spotlight for as long as it was and remains to be. I don't think a lot of people probably so they just heard after a while, after you've heard a song a couple times, you're not listening so specifically, especially we're
That's
talking
fair.
about a song that most people are associating with just the show, right? So they're
That's
almost
fair.
just hearing this. They're not thinking about the meaning as much as it's just in their head, what it sounds like, the melody. So I think really, again, I don't think the show's creators were concerned as long as the show was selling, the show was continuing, and the song wasn't offending too many people. I think it had a place and it's never lost it.
Hey, more than fair, man. Thanks for your insight.
Cool. Shelly, you had your hand raised.
So, talking about like prosody and emotion, and making like one word can kind of like deter from where you were going if you don't say it with the right emotion. For example, a song that I wrote, this guy's singing it, and it's Come On In. And it's this guy who's in a bar and he's fantasizing. You don't know it, but he's fantasizing about this lost love. And it goes through a couple verses of that. And then the bartender says, I see you've been daydreaming again. And she slides a napkin over, basically saying, I'm here and you can come to my place. And the very last part of it is she's saying, come on in. Like, I'll leave the light on, come on in. And when he sang it, he said, come on in. And I was like, no, 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 you're saying that like so aggressively when she's being like subtly saying, hey, come on in, like that. And so just one line, it's like, and I'm super picky about stuff like that. When I'm singing it, I know what I'm trying to say. You give it to someone else, you kind of got to walk them through every part of that if they're not getting it. Like, you need to say it with what the story is telling. Like, if you're telling somebody that story, how would you say that at the end? Like, you'd be all like sexy, kind of like, come on in, like that, not aggressive. So
Yeah, no, I think phrasing matters, right? Like that's how you pronounce and how you um perform or how you sing the lyric is definitely powerful. Um it's just like punctuation in written word, a few misplaced commas or periods can really change, you know, the meaning.
the meaning, yeah.
Yeah. Victor.
Yeah, the phrasing, of course, is kind of more of a performance, but you can write songs in such a way that they have to be phrased either right or wrong. And I'm
Correct.
thinking of that wonderful, another Midwesterner, Peter Schickele, the musicologist behind PDQ Bach, illustrated this with a wonderful Christmas tune called Throw the Yule Log on Uncle John, which he wrote the first time. It's throw the Yule log on, Uncle John. And then the chorus goes through a breakdown, and then they come back through throw the Yule log on Uncle John. Changes the whole meaning of the sentence, right? So, and
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of singers do that unintentionally. Um, what I'm taking away from this whole day is you used the word script, and I was already kind of moving in that direction, and then I thought, yeah, that's definitely it for me. We can talk about all these rules about like using big words or using unfamiliar regionalisms and such. And you always say, Chad, no rules, just tools. For me, if I were going to sum up this whole day on a bumper sticker, it would have that sense of what in movies they talk about the willing suspension of disbelief. And so in movies, there are so many ways, and we've all seen this in bad movies that just jar us out of the little world that we go into while we're watching it, to remember, oh my God, I'm sitting in a theater with, 100 other people, and I'm just looking at flickering lights on a screen. That's death to the movie right there. We only have one. We don't have visual or oral. We just basically have sound, right? That we need to work in. And so all of these things can't break the singer's willing suspension of disbelief. They've come into our world to feel something that we as writers have felt, and we want them to be in that disbelief that I'm not this, that I'm a different person from you and I don't feel that way, right? Because if we hit on a universal emotion, they felt that way. They may not have parked out in kudzu, but they've gone, they've gone under the bleachers, they've gone somewhere, right? So we can all, think of great songs that have broken every single one of these rules, but have done so with great success. And so, to me, you can't break that bond with the listener. That's going to make the song seem unfamiliar, as you said way back at the beginning, when it sounds written. Yeah, it's only a song, folks, right? And that just breaks the whole emotional bond that you have with your listeners.
Yeah, awesome point, Victor. And I think you summarized exactly what I was trying to say. And I want all of you to know that this is not scientific. Like, if you do this, this will happen, right? Like, this is, you have to experiment to see how all the elements work to you. And then how do they work together when it's experienced by someone that's not you, right? So that takes a lot of trial and error, and it takes a lot of practice. And I wish it was as easy as just saying, like, I'm going to do one thing, or this is exactly how you can do it. But that just doesn't exist, right? So anytime I'm teaching you these things, take it as, like Victor said, it's tools, it's not rules, and it doesn't always work. Victor, do you have something else?
Yeah, I was just going to expand on that since nobody else is in line. I don't know if you watch the YouTuber Grady Smith. He does his channels about country music, and he had a very interesting one that I think really relates to what you were talking about at the very beginning about authenticity and genuine emotion. He had one on Zach Bryan maybe 2-3 weeks ago that I've been thinking about a lot, and it
Cool.
was an interesting perspective I haven't seen anywhere else. He says that Zach Bryan is country music's Nirvana moment. And by that he meant Kurt Cobain, not Buddhist Nirvana, but the band Nirvana.
Yeah.
And he goes through a whole bunch of reasons why he thinks they're true. And I think that they're all valid in a way. The one that I think is the most central to his point is one that he didn't really develop, is that both of these came into a situation in their own respective genres, if you will, in which music had become pretty flaccid and pretty predictable. And they both are hollering about genuine emotions that their listeners can relate to. And especially with Zach, because he's crossing over all over the place, right? He's having enormous moments on pop charts, not just on the country charts, because these songs are very raw, and you can tell he felt that way. Just as you could tell Kurt Cobain when they first came out, what was that 1989, 1990, something like that, very early. Kurt had a terrible life as a child. He'd been a teenage prostitute. It was just awful. When he was raging against the machine, it sounded real. You had, even if you didn't like grunge, you understood what he was talking about. Same thing for Zach. These are authentic emotions. Both of these guys have felt what they're talking about. And that, I think, is so critical to making that emotional bond with the listener.
So that's an interesting point, Victor, and it's making me think, like, I know the answer to this, but Kurt Cobain and Zach Bryan, they're not chasing what's popular, right? They were being themselves, and they were being true to who they are. That just happened to be counter to what commercial music was doing at that time, right? So it becomes the sort of like new thing, because now what I'm seeing in music is there's a lot of people trying to sound like Zach Bryan, right? Like, now all of a sudden country is now just really a little bit more, not as well, parts of country, I should say. There's still bro country. There's still like these pockets of country that are very mainstream, very radio driven. But
And
now
bro
this,
country, if I can just break in there to your thought to
yeah,
support you there. Bro country is what Grady said had kind of reached the same kind of end of the line that prog rock had and 80s music had when Cobain came along. So yes, indeed. God, I lost my train of thought now. I'll shut up.
So I had seen an interview with a songwriter one time, and I want to draw this because I think he made a point of how the music industry works and how people's taste works and how this relates to all of us basically, right? So can you see the whiteboard? Can everybody see that? Um he said that the music industry does this. The music industry goes in these trends, right? So maybe this is bro country. This is whatever Zach Bryan is. You know, we kind of go in this up and down where nothing stays for long, right? And I think nowadays, I think it stays even less time. But what this songwriter was trying to say is if you stay true to yourself and you have a flat line, the music industry will eventually come back to what you do, right? And if you're busy chasing these, you're chasing the highs and lows and you're not being true to yourself, you're always going to be chasing and you're never going to be what you really want to be or who you actually are. So basically, they were saying if you stay true to yourself, the industry, it may take 10, 15, 20 years, but sometime what you do will be in style again. And I always think about that when I think about my music and what I'm doing. It's like, yeah. And sometimes I hear my style of music come back around and I'm like, dang it, I missed the boat again. But hopefully that's a helpful kind of thing about staying true to who you do, who you are.
Chad, I think that's actually right. And that reminded me of where I was going to go on this, is because a lot of people say that Zach Bryan is just warmed over Tyler Childers. And I don't agree with that. They have a similar sound, but Zach Bryan's lyrics speak to me as a non-country music person more intensely than Tyler Childers' lyrics do, even though I agree the sound there is very similar. So I think that graph, that's actually beautiful. That's it. Zach is speaking out of the heart for sure. And Tyler Childers, he may be going for the #1 records, right? He may be trying just a little bit too hard for to write a song, what he thinks is.
Do you think? I mean, I think Tyler is pretty true to himself too, but he's sort of stepped into being more commercial.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. I don't think
Yeah.
he's being inauthentic, but he's not speaking to me as someone who isn't already bought into the culture, whereas Zach
Yeah.
Bryan does. And Zach, I don't think of as a crossover. He's definitely red dirt country. There's no doubt about it. But he speaks to me in a way that Childers doesn't. And I think that's not about sound, and it's not about all these other things. It's not about sounding like or sounding unlike somebody. There's
Yeah.
something that's more universal, perhaps, in the way Zach presents himself, that Tyler sounds to me like a country singer and Zach doesn't.
Well, and the thing is too, like that's the beauty of music and songwriting as art, right? Like we all resonate with different things, and what I like, other people don't like. What you like, you know, you're saying like you don't quite resonate with Tyler quite as much, but then there's other people that would be like, I'm team Tyler and I'm not, you know, Zach. So that's the beauty of what we do, right? You kind of find what connects with you. Jay, you had your hand raised.
Well, so I hear what people are saying, and I feel like a lot of it makes sense, but and what I'm gonna say is I'm sure arguable in a lot of different ways. I feel as though a lot of people discuss the patterns, often like decade-long patterns, the music of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, yada yada yada. And when I think about that, right, I think about like in the 90s, how I was like, wow, my mom was right. Bell-bottom jeans did come back, and I laugh. But the thing is, like, I don't have a pattern or a historical marker to go off of when it comes to music. Because when I look at the industry, there may have been control mechanisms that I'm unaware of that help them control the cycles of music decade after decade, kind of like steering things back. But as we go into the new democratization of music, where there are genres and subgenres of subgenres of subgenres, it's almost kind of like caught in a loop of infinite divides. It was like without getting into sub quantum physics of audio, it's I feel like we're on a really new ground, and I think people have a tendency to discount where changes take place sometimes because we're so used to what is familiar, which has been very patterned. And so I'm kind of curious. I'm a little bit, honestly, I would say a little bit scared because there's no security for Rails saying, hey, look, this is coming back around. So if I just do this, then this is going to happen. But there's the familiar aspects of things as well. So I guess we're going to see. I'm very excited and curious to see what comes, but I think
Yeah.
that there are different rules now.
Well, I think when what you're talking about, Jay, and sort of what we're talking about is there's music that moves into the stratosphere of crossing, like it's generally like household name type stuff. Like I feel like Zach Bryan has now reached the suburbs, right? Like
Right.
Zach Bryan is in the suburbs of Minneapolis. Like he may have started in the country, but now it's like we have soccer moms that are listening to Zach Bryan, right? So there's an industry, there's a music industry that's driven by where the label money goes. And at this moment, the label money has decided to back artists like Zach Bryan because he had created sort of a cottage industry of his own. So then it gets enough spotlight to where the industry and the shareholders want to get a little piece of that. And oh, well, if he's being successful on a small scale, what if our infrastructure can make it that much bigger, right? So then you move from it's not about the music, it's about the merchandise, it's about the tour, it's about like endorsements, it's about all of those things, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the culture. But what Jay is talking about is we are in a time where every single one of us has the ability to develop a music career that is not within the mainstream, but could create a good living for us. Like we've talked to people on the channel like Jeffrey Straker out of Canada, who's been a full-time musician and makes a good living. He's done that for 16, 17 years. We've talked to Matthew Griswold, who is from Minnesota here, where he's signed to a publishing deal with Universal and he gigs, right? Like he's told me he makes six figures as a musician, as his own boss. He's not on radio. He does get his music into TV shows and film and things like that. But from what we consider to be commercial success, he's nowhere near that. And I think he'd understand what I'm saying. So I'm not saying he's not successful, but he's not Zach Bryan right now, right? Like Zach Bryan has the machine backing him at this point. And Chuck had made a comment in the chat about like sometimes it's not about what people like, it's about where the money goes. And that's 100% true about radio, songs that make it to the stratosphere. But the thing is we live in a time where we can all release our own music for very little money and actually create our own cottage industry of fans and reaching people without the gatekeepers of the corporate side of things. So there are bands that literally are selling out tours across the country right now that none of us will ever hear about, but they will pack theaters and nobody knows their name except for their fans. And they're making really good money doing it. So there's not this, I think there's this myth that it's like either you're a newbie or you're a superstar, right? But there's a ton of room and there's a whole world of musicians out there that make really good money if that's what they want to do in between there. So I don't know where I was going with that, but hopefully that's encouraging to you where if you want to make money with music, you just got to learn the business, right? Like how do you get someone to say, I like what you do enough to exchange money and time for it? That's the key. Jeanette, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I wanted to add like that chart you had brought up, how there's like the mainstream and all that, and how your original music will always come back to your originality. I think it's all based on being timeless. And I know that sounds cheesy, but I think it states the ground that whatever you do, if you know your fan base is gonna come back to that fan base. And yeah, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, basically it's all come down to the originality because, it's like a trend, like this is never gonna last, this music is not gonna last. But if you know your true music and you know your fan base, that's all that's gonna matter.
Yeah, and that makes me think of when we're writing our songs, we really should be writing to try to really impress ourselves first, right? Like we should be writing for ourselves because trying to write something you think is going to impress somebody else is the most depressing and like discouraging thing on earth because people's taste changes and people's opinions are just opinions. The one that really matters to get behind is your own opinion of your own music. And none of us really, I think, feel like we're at the point, or we shouldn't ever feel like we know everything and we can't improve, right? But we also should be trying to get to a point where we're like, you know what? I'm pretty good. And if you don't feel that way, keep going because eventually the work will start to be like, you know what? I'm actually not as bad as I thought I was. And if that takes 10 years, that's okay. I just saw a really good interview with Jason Isbell that said he wrote songs for 10 years that nobody ever really heard, but he thinks that 10 years was where he actually learned how to write, And I think that's encouraging to me is like, we don't have to share the stuff we're like, ugh, yeah, I can do better than that. We don't have to share that stuff. We control what we show to the world. But I think as long as we are confident in what we're doing, those spears and pins that the world will poke into our art won't have to hurt as bad because there are people out there that are going to rip your art apart. And that sucks. But that's just how things are. What else y'all want to talk about? Shelly says maybe when she's 80, she'll be like that finally. Hey, but it's the ride, Shelly. You can look back and think I spent, how many Saturdays with Chad and all the people online and like think of all the people that and all the memories and stuff. Like to me, that's worth more than the song, right?
It is the journey for sure.
Yeah.
And I came into this like completely knowing nothing a couple years ago. And when I look at how much I know now, it's night and day. So it gives me hope. And then also really, I like that piece really, it is about being true to yourself because, this one friend of mine, he always like finds like, well, it's like this guy or like that guy. And I'm like, why are you always looking to see like what it's like someone else? That's them. When you just sit and you let the spirit move you or whatever it is that happens, it's magical. Then you're being true to yourself. You have your own style. And so, I just like keep telling them, stop trying to, stop listening to everybody else and listen to yourself and see what comes from within instead of being like some other artist. So, and I feel like I'm the same way. If you tried to say, well, what kind of music do you write? I'd be like, I don't know. It's all over the map because whatever comes to me, especially when I'm doing a challenge, like from you,
Yeah.
you get to, get out of the box and you write something that's not your typical style or something. And that really helps to shake things up.
Yeah. And I think you have to do it because you enjoy songwriting, right? Like it is the process that you have to like, because if you only judged it based on how much money you can make with it, all of us would be we would always feel like failures, But I feel successful if I write a song that I can kind of dig, and that I, even like I might be the only person listening to it, but I like it. So, that makes it fun. Chuck, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, and it's important to not forget, yes, be true, of course, but don't forget you're a storyteller. I mean, we do make up stuff too, right? It's a mix of your truth, right? And I'm not saying you got to lie about stuff, but we don't have to live everything that we write about. It might be something we read, it might be something we hear somebody say, might be something we hear in another person's song even, right? But we do have artistic liberty here to tell a story, and every little point of it might not be true. I don't have to be bitten by a shark to know what it probably feels like and what the experience might be like to maybe write a line about it. But I think it's really important to be yourself. Shelley just made that point. That is so key. So no matter who you write for, whether it's yourself, whether it's another artist, you can hear yourself in the song. But again, especially if you're writing for somebody else, you have that liberty to weave a tale, weave a story, and tell it in your way. And it might not be all factual to your life, but that's okay. It's really okay.
Awesome. Any other questions or thoughts just on songwriting in general? Victor.
Yeah, Chuck made a very good point there. I think you don't have to live the situation, but you had to have felt what you said you felt. So, Tolkien never lived in Middle Earth, never met an elf or a hobbit, never had a magic ring, but the book still reads true because he felt those things that the story, as Chuck said, is really about. It's not about hobbits and elves. It's about addictions, it's about power, it's about all of these very, very human things. And Tolkien felt those and thought a lot about them, and that's why his book was, after the Bible, the best-selling book of the 20th century. And I think the same principle applies to writing songs.
Wow. Awesome. That's a good point. All right. So anything else, or we can also wrap things up for today as well. So I wanted to let you know that the next planned meeting is coming up in November on November 4th. And that's going to be a challenge kickoff. So we're going to do a songwriting challenge for November, and then December 2nd will be where we share the songs. But this time it's going to be different, where we're going to do a top lining challenge where I'm actually going to upload a music track, and you're going to write a song and record the song based on the music track that I upload. So a different way of writing. So some of you who aren't necessarily musicians, you'll have a chance to write to an existing track. And I think it's a good exercise in how a lot of people write songs now. So I think it will be fun. And I haven't put together the track yet or anything. That's something that I have to do over the next few weeks. But I thought that might be something fun to give a try and see what you can come up with, when you don't have to necessarily think about the music part. That's already done for you. So what are your thoughts on that? Smiles? Shelley?
So I actually have done this from a different group, but they had like 6 tracks to choose from. So there was country, pop, this or that. And then everybody was supposed to submit their songs of whatever they wrote. And I mean, I love what I wrote. I love it, but it's connected to that track, which doesn't belong to me. And they were like, oh, you can use it. You can do whatever you want. And I was like, yeah, you say that. But so then what I did is I went and like recreated more or less that track. And what's kind of funny is this song that I chose, the country version, which is kind of a pop country. So it moves along. I love the way it sounds. And I was monkeying around in Band in a Box, creating a different style track, thinking it'll be similar. And I ended up in this, I don't know, Western honky tonk type track. and completely surprised. And I'm loving it. I turn it on and I'm dancing around and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to have like a couple versions of the same song, just totally different soundtracks. So I think it's really a good exercise, and it'll be interesting to see how different everything turns out with the same track underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to your point, I won't have time to do multiple tracks, but my plan is to make it sort of genre agnostic, right? Like it's not going to be so production heavy that it's like cornered into a genre. It's going to be more about the tempo, the feel of the chords, and kind of something that'll be more of a generic track. You know what I mean? So that way you can put your own spin on it. And Victor says genre non-conforming. I don't know if I'd say that far, but it could be maybe country. It could be, you know, it'll be something that it'll leave enough to where you're not going to instantly all do the same thing, if that makes sense. So Chuck says it's going to sound very Midwestern. Yeah, you betcha. Awesome. Well, everybody, this has been super fun. John says I could mess with the group and do a hip hop track. Could, yeah. I was
Chad,
thinking.
do you
Oh,
have
yeah, go
a
ahead.
theme song for At-Home Songwriting?
I don't. Well, yes, I do actually. I have a little instrumental thing that I use on the starts of the videos that I created.
Any singing to go with that?
There's no singing. No, it's just an instrumental.
Maybe a challenge for you there, something to think about, a little at-home songwriting.
Like a little
ditty.
jingle. There you go.
Yes.
This top lighting one won't be that way. It'll be more, you know, to write more of a commercial song, but yeah, that's something to think about for sure.
Hey,
Awesome.
Chad, thanks so much for being here today. I know you're not at top form there. I can hear it in your voice, but thanks for bearing with this. You're quite a true.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody, and hopefully you have a good weekend. I'll see you, you know, at least a month from now, and if I set up any other meetings in the meantime, you'll get notified as well. So it was great to hang out, and we'll see everybody soon. Bye.